Okay, I can do this. Five Nights at Freddy's is a point-and-click survival horror game developed and published by indie developer Scott Cawthon and released in August 2014 for Microsoft Windows. The game would also be ported to Android and iOS a few weeks later. The Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One all received ports of the game in November 2019. Scott Cawthon came up with the idea for Five Nights at Freddy's after his previous game, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, was heavily ridiculed for having laughably bad character models that moved about like robots. This led many people to liken the characters in the game to animatronic animals like you would see in an amusement park. However, instead of letting all this criticism destroy his dream of becoming a respected game developer, he instead decided to use the criticism constructively to create something truly unique and terrifying. Oh Christ. Okay, calm down. Oh no. Jesus. Upon its release, Five Nights at Freddy's became a massive hit for Scott, with the game being purchased by thousands of people in its first few weeks alone. The game was also reviewed very well, with many publications calling it one of the scariest games ever made. However, the game also received criticism for its short length and simplistic gameplay. Five Nights at Freddy's incredible success can also be largely attributed to how popular the game became with Let's Players. Millions upon millions of people would become aware of the game through their favourite YouTubers and Twitch streamers. All of this success would of course lead to a shit ton of Five Nights merch being released. Bobbleheads, clothing, you name it. More importantly, however, the success of the first game gave Scott the required funding to go on and develop further sequels in the Five Nights series. And hoo boy, did he ever develop sequels. In less than 12 months, Scott somehow managed to develop and release a further 3 sequels in the Five Nights at Freddy series. These games would all go on to become massive commercial successes. However, the critical reception the later games received was far more mixed when compared with the original game. This was mostly due to the fact that the sequels played very similarly to the original, with very few new additions to mix up the gameplay. Personally, while I don't hate the sequels, I don't think they're anywhere near as good as the first game. They all feel very rushed and unfinished, and the gameplay is often brutally difficult and unfair at times. I might talk about these games at a later date, but for now I want to focus on the first game, and what made it such a unique and terrifying survival horror game. I should say up front that I don't intend to go into great detail about Five Nights at Freddy's story, mainly because several other channels have already done a far better job at explaining the lore of this series than I ever could. I highly recommend checking out the Game Theorist's fantastic video series on the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise if you are interested in learning more about this universe and its characters. But without further ado, let's get started. Five Nights at Freddy's story takes place in a restaurant called Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. A man named Mike Smith has just started his new job at the restaurant as a security guard. This is the character we play as in the game. Your main goal in Five Nights at Freddy's is to survive 5 nights at your new job. Get it? Because it's called Five Nights at Freddy's. I can't be arsed explaining it. You survive a night when you make it from 12 AM to 6 AM without getting your face eaten off. As to be expected in games like this though, that's easier said than done. During your first night on the job, you will receive a voicemail from the restaurant's previous security guard, who will fill you in on the history of the restaurant and some of the controversy surrounding the place.
Hello? Hello? I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. I actually worked in that office before you. I'm finishing up my last week now, as a matter of I know it can be a bit overwhelming, but I'm here to tell you there's nothing to worry about. You'll be fine. So let's just focus on getting you through your first week, okay?
Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has apparently become a very popular restaurant with young children, thanks in no small part to the 4 lovable animatronic animals who entertain customers during the day with their singing and dancing. And they all have such interesting names: Bonnie the Bunny, Chica the Chicken, Foxy the Fox, and Freddy Faz... Hey, where's Freddy? I'm sure he was... Ah, there he is. However, while these creatures are friendly during the day, most of the time, at night things become very different. You are warned by the previous security guard that if any of the animatronics see you at night, they will assume you're an endoskeleton out of its costume, and they will then try to stuff you into a spare Freddy costume, probably killing you in the process. Thankfully, however, you're not left completely defenseless against these monstrosities. For one thing, you have access to all the security cameras in the restaurant. This allows you to keep track of where the animatronics are at any one time, and also gives you a good idea of how close they are to your security booth. If you feel like something is right outside your door, you can turn on the hallway lights to check. If an animatronic does manage to make it to one of your doors, you can simply close that door and wait for them to go away again. This will all initially feel very straightforward and rather simplistic, but there's a catch. Every time you view the security cameras, every time you turn on the lights, hell, every time you decide to close one of the doors, you are draining the restaurant's power supply. Yeah, I know, it doesn't make sense to me either. This means that you need to be resourceful. You can't simply close both doors and call it a night. Well, I mean, you technically can if you turn on infinite power at the settings menu, but I'd have to wonder why you're even playing the game at that point. You will quickly learn that in order to survive, you will need to use the surveillance cameras, lights, and doors as sparingly as possible. When using the security cameras, for instance, you should only check the rooms that are absolutely necessary, such as Foxy's lair or the rooms either side of your security office. Spending too long checking out areas that aren't important will result in your power supply being drained far too quickly. Likewise, if you need to shut one of the doors to keep an animatronic out, you should only keep that door shut for as short a time as possible. It's a careful balancing act of making sure you have enough power to make it through the night, while also not being so lenient on power usage that you end up letting an animatronic into your boot. It reminds me a lot of managing my resources in Resident Evil, except in this case, the resource you are managing is power. The first few nights of the game are relatively simple and are designed to give players the time and space to get used to the game's mechanics. For example, the animatronics take a long time to start moving about during night 1. This gives the player time to become accustomed to the controls, and also allows them to take their time while navigating through the security cameras in the restaurant. It's important that new players are given the chance to become accustomed to the layout of the restaurant in Five Nights at Freddy's, and thankfully night 1 is uneventful enough that this should not be a problem for most people. However, it's around night 3 that things really start heating up, as you have to not only deal with Bonnie and Chica, but Foxy as well. Foxy works differently to the other animatronics, in that he will not move while the camera is on him. He will simply remain in place until the player is no longer keeping an eye on him. So very quickly you will realize that to avoid Foxy attacking you, you will need to frequently check in on him to make sure he hasn't moved. Take too long to do this, and you will see Foxy tearing down the halls to get you, which I have to admit was the most fucking terrifying thing I had ever seen the first time I experienced it. Unfortunately, it was around night 3 that I discovered the optimal way to play this game, and once I did, Five Nights at Freddy's lost a lot of its tension and horror. Basically, aside from keeping an eye on Foxy, the surveillance cameras are basically useless. I mean, yes, you can use the cameras to check where Bonnie and Chica are, but what's the point of that? Bonnie and Chica are going to make it to your security room, regardless of whether you view them on the security camera or not. the best way to play the game is to check on Foxy, briefly turn on the hallway lights to make sure Bonnie and Chica aren't outside, and then check up on Foxy again. This strategy works far too well and makes completing the game almost a breeze. I will admit that towards the end of the game, a spanner is thrown in the works in the form of Freddy Fazbear, a little shit stain who seemingly appears from thin air at times. If you can catch him on camera, however, you will be able to hold him in place relatively easily. But again, this doesn't really mix things up enough. The only real difference is instead of only checking in on Foxy, you are now also checking in on Freddy. It's hardly a game changer. However, despite how easy the game can be once you've figured out how the mechanics work, it's almost inevitable that you will die several times before you reach that point. All deaths play out in practically the same way. One of the animatronics will jump up in front of you, accompanied with an ear-piercing screeching noise. And you know what? It's pretty effective. In fact, if someone was to tell me that they didn't once flinch when greeted with one of these jump scares, I would not believe them. They just do their job too well. The worst one is when you run out of power and Freddy appears. Music starts playing, and then everything goes dark. And eventually... It's horrible because this sequence is randomized every time you run out of power. Sometimes Freddy might take upwards of a minute to jump scare you, other times it can happen almost instantly. Well, that was unpleasant. However, while I do think the jump scares are very effective in Five Nights at Freddy's, I'd be hesitant to call the game truly scary, especially once you get good at the game. Once you have become numb to all the cheap jump scares, there really isn't a huge amount else to unnerve you in the game. However, during your first few hours with Five Nights at Freddy's, when you still haven't fully grasped the game's mechanics, I'd struggle to think of another game as terrifying as this one. Five Nights at Freddy's truly understands how to instill anxiety in the player. This is mostly thanks to the game's excellent sound design that will constantly have you questioning everything around you. Once you have completed the game, there are still a few extra little bonuses to try out. There is the sixth night, which is basically a super challenging final night where all the animatronics are super aggressive and death comes quickly. Even seasoned FNAF players will probably break a sweat while attempting to complete this challenge. There is also the custom night, where you can manually adjust the aggressiveness of all the animatronics. If you somehow manage to complete custom night with all animatronics set to 20, you are a total badass. It's something I will never be able to do. No matter how hard I try, they always catch me in the end. Just like in real life. Shit, not again. There's got to be something in here that can help me get out of this situation. Perfect. Despite the fact that FNAF's lore would become increasingly dense and convoluted as the games went on, the first game's story is surprisingly simple. You are just a security guard working at a fucked up restaurant. I mean, yes, the previous employee who worked at the restaurant will occasionally send you voicemails, filling you in on the history of the restaurant. But apart from that, there is very little actual plot to be found in the game. You make it through your 5 nights at Freddy's and are given a pathetic paycheck as thanks. And while you might hear about certain events like the bite of 87 from the restaurant's previous employee, you will still need to play the later games to understand what any of it means. Overall, however, I believe that Five Nights at Freddy's still holds up as an excellent survival horror game. It's intense and unlike any other horror series out there. It also won't break the bank, costing about €5 to buy on most platforms. Give it a go if you think it looks interesting. Oh no, I'm going to run out of power. No. Oh my god. Oh my god. Okay. Okay. What? I'm alive. I'm alive. I made it. Oh my god. Oh, thank Christ.